Thanks for tuning in to Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. South Korea and U.S. forces kicked off their annual Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise this week, aiming to boost joint defense posture against evolving North Korea threats. The joint drill comes after President Yoon Suk-yeol unveiled a new unification doctrine that puts much greater emphasis on freedom, democracy, and human rights values than past unification approaches. Despite the potential for these developments to provoke North Korea, Pyongyang's missile activity and trash balloon campaign has notably paused, leaving many to speculate on its next possible move. Meanwhile, a North Korean soldier defected to the south, adding to the recent series of defections from the north. For some expert insights into the latest issues surrounding the two Koreas, Dr. Myong-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy, joins me in the studio. It's always a great pleasure to have you with us.
Likewise.
For another Voice, NK News correspondent Shreyas Reddy is also here with us tonight. It's been a while. It's great to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
So Shreyas, let's start off with the North Korean soldier's defection.
Yeah.
What do we know so far, and what are the implications?
Well, so far the information that we have is limited, which is typical for such cases. When the defection initially happens, the military usually takes perhaps a couple of weeks or so just to investigate with the defector, try and see what their story is before we start getting more details. So far, all we have really from official sources is the confirmation of the defection. But beyond that, we've had some indication from South Korean media indicating that this is a soldier, and a soldier crossed over near Kosong on the east coast of South Korea. And what that means, though, at the moment, we still can't say in isolation, but we do know that this follows another recent defection just 2 weeks ago, also across the border. And it should be noted that a lot of these defections that have been coming over the past couple of years have come in pretty much in a direct crossing from North Korea to South Korea, which historically most defections used to happen with a rather circuitous route through Southeast Asia and then eventually to South Korea. But we've seen border closures and increasing border restrictions in both North Korea and China have made it increasingly hard for North Koreans to get out. So now it does look like increasingly this is the best mode of escape for defectors who want to get to South Korea.
As you mentioned, the soldier's defection came just 12 days after a North Korean civilian escaped to the south. And last November, a North Korean senior diplomat, Lee Yu-gyu, also defected to the south. And Shreyas did briefly touch upon this, but Dr. Go, how do you analyze the recent trends of defections from North Korea, and what insights can we draw from it?
Well, there's always a motivation for North Koreans to defect to the south or to China. I mean, anyways, there's always a reason for them to leave the country. I mean, we're talking about structural reasons such as a very oppressive political system, not just in politics, but also now the regime has dialed up the level of oppression by curtailing the access to essentially any use of possession of South cultural products such as movies and dramas and songs, which are apparently very widespread within the North Korean society, criminalizing the possession and then consumption of those products. So there's clearly a motivation for North Koreans to leave, and also there's the opportunity reasons. I think the pandemic, the post-pandemic North Korea is still suffering from economic crisis. So people clearly want to find the new opportunities abroad. But as Shreyas has pointed out, the usual route for escaping North Korea, which is the border region between China and North Korea, is closed down. So, and then the people are taking more risk to come to the south and essentially trying to cross the DMZ, which is heavily militarized and very risky. But I think people are taking more risk because there's clearly more motivation for them to leave. And also I think the antagonism between North and South that are prevalent nowadays is probably another factor that incentivizes the North Korean defectors, because the defectors are probably expect South Korea to receive them, welcome them more positively now that the two Koreas are clearly in bad terms. So unlike in previous South Korean administration, which tried to engage North Korea, and there's some risk that the defection would not be accepted by the South. Now that's no longer the case. So I think that really increases the expectation on the part of potential defectors in North Korea to take the chances and trying to defect to South.
If we look at the exact numbers, less than 200 North Koreans defected to the South last year, which is a significant drop from the previous years, especially pre-pandemic years. But it seems there is a growing number of high-ranking officials and North Korean elites that are opting to leave North Korea, which, as you pointed out, could be partly because North Koreans are now more motivated to leave North Korea than before.
There's already been a number of high-level defections from North Korea, especially among the diplomats. And clearly, diplomats are more better positioned to defect because they're already outside of the country, despite the fact that they're under constant surveillance. If you spend enough time abroad, the chances that they can find opportunities to defect. I think, and also another reason why North Korean diplomats are defecting is because, as reported, North Korean Kim Jong-un regime has undergone a wholesale purge of the North Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We know that the previous Foreign Minister Lee Young-ho has been purged, and I think, and then also in addition to a number of senior diplomats, and I think that has really demoralized the North Korean diplomatic corps, and this essentially giving the incentives for North Korean diplomats who are still posted abroad to defect while they have the chance.
Now, moving on to the U.S. Democratic Party's newly unveiled policy platform, it renewed its commitment to defend South Korea from evolving North Korea threats, but it dropped denuclearization goal of Pyongyang. And we're also getting reports that President Biden has approved new nuclear weapons strategy. What do you make of all this? Perhaps a shift in Washington's North Korea policy?
Well, there are lots of different ways of looking at this. One theory that some have suggested is perhaps this is a sign that the Biden administration and effectively Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee are sort of moving to a new reality where they look at North Korea as essentially already possessing nuclear weapons and saying maybe it's time to start looking at the possibility of arms control. But to be honest, in the last few years, whenever the topic of arms control has been brought up, they have pretty much immediately rejected that option and emphasized the need for denuclearization. And to some extent, this was kind of borne out again. Just yesterday, Colin Kahl, a former Pentagon official, came out and said that if Kamala Harris comes to power in the next election, she will continue with the emphasis on denuclearization. Obviously, no absolutes, but perhaps one other explanation could just be that North Korea in itself has perhaps been less of a priority over the last 4 years for the Biden administration. And frankly, it's not just them. Even the Republican platform didn't really mention North Korea as such. So it's possible that it'll still be part of their goal, just not necessarily the main goal. And this is something that we also see reflected in the reports about Biden's supposed new nuclear strategy. Now, we don't really know the details beyond media reports about what this could involve, but so far the report suggests that its main emphasis is China, which is very much in line with Biden's security strategy over the last few years, and perhaps North Korea is more secondary as a nuclear concern as well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a complete sea change just yet.
So Biden's reported approval of new nuclear strategies are mainly aimed at countering China and perhaps the emerging axis of China, North Korea, and Russia.
Yeah,
right.
So
and we don't know for sure yet if this could mean a shift in Washington's North Korea policy, and it remains to be seen whether denuclearization talks will be shifted to arms control talks. Now, Dr. Ko, President Yoon introduced South Korea's new unification doctrine, marking National Liberation Day last week. What's your take on it, and also on the controversy that it implies absorption of North Korea through military aggression?
Well, I think I'll address the latter part first. I think that's a little bit of an exaggerated interpretation of what President unification doctrine is about. Clearly, the president has essentially introduced a fundamental change to the South Korea's conception of unification going forward. The big contrast between the President Yoon's doctrine and the previous doctrine, which has been placed for the last 30 years, is that the President Yoon is emphasizing value here. In this case, the value would be liberty. And the reason why he's emphasizing this is because I think it's essentially an acknowledgement that unification is no longer possible between the two Koreas when those two Koreas don't have any overlapping values, politically speaking. So when the previous unification doctrine, which emphasizes the national identity, that the two Koreas are part of the same nation, came about, South Korea had just become democratic, and therefore the gap between North and South, politically speaking, wasn't that big. And also, reflects the optimism of the post-Cold War. There's expectation before that North Korea was on the verge of a transformation, essentially will open up, reform itself, and accept better values such as freedom and so forth, but individual rights especially. But then 30 years since then, we have seen North Korea drifting further away from these liberal values that South Korea has become more of a champion of. So I think President Yoon is trying to highlight the fact that unification at all cost, unification ignores the fundamental flaws in the North Korean regime. It's not worth it. And also it's not going to be possible because people in South Korea are going to be fundamentally opposed to unifying itself with such a regime. So and also it's against the universal values and norms that are currently in place. For instance, we cannot imagine accepting Kim Jong-un, giving him a free pass, despite the wide-ranging like a human rights violation the regime has subject its own people to. So I think this kind of reality essentially is being reflected in the President Yoon's new doctrine. So it's not unification by absorption, but it's more about waiting for North Korea to accept the universal norms and values before engaging on unification. So in that sense, it's more about synchronizing the two Koreas' own identity that reflects the universal values and norms.
And Shreyas, North Korea remains silent to President Yoon's new unification roadmap, which most likely may have raised its eyebrows. What could be some possible reasons?
Well, I think perhaps one of the simplest reasons could be maybe they're taking their time to weigh their response. Certainly after President Yoon announced his audacious initiative a couple of years ago, they took a few days, I think it was like 4 or 5 days, which we've already passed that threshold. But then at that point they responded to it. This time, perhaps because it is in many ways an even more ambitious overhaul, much more to deal with, they could be taking their time. But there are other factors as well. Now, inter-Korean ties are particularly fraught since late last year, when the comprehensive military agreement between the two sides was essentially suspended. And at the end of last year, Kim Jong-un took unification off the table, said it is essentially impossible. And so perhaps they're looking at this and saying, this isn't something we immediately need to respond to. We've already made our displeasure clear. I'm sure they'll eventually release some statement that they haven't really stopped expressing their displeasure in other ways. But maybe there could be more concrete ways. For example, for a long time now, we have been waiting to see if and when they amend their constitution in a session of the Supreme People's Assembly, North Korea's rubber-stamp parliament. It's all but a given that they will make that change, that they will formally say, we're no longer pursuing unification, we're no longer see ourselves as one country. So if and when they do it, maybe that could be a more telling statement than simply releasing a statement of condemnation. But at the same time, I think we will also see the latter. One perhaps other factor is North Korea could simply have other things to deal with on its plate right now. We know that the country is dealing with severe floods. They're struggling at the moment. So that's something that, at least from a propaganda perspective, that is taking up their attention, where they're trying to portray the leader in particular as taking care of the people. So maybe this is something that they could release a statement to external audiences, but it's also not the biggest priority. At the same time, on the foreign relations front, they could also have other competing interests with China and Russia, where they're trying to balance their relationship. Perhaps going all out on an anti-South Korea front may not be the most helpful policy for them at the moment.
Meanwhile, South Korea and U.S. forces kicked off their Ulchi Freedom Shield combined exercise. Give us the details. What's different from last year?
Well, they have slightly expanded in terms of the number of exercises. So they've got 48 field training drills this year, up from 38 last year. But at the same time, there are some other changes. In some ways, while they've expanded it, in some ways perhaps it's less how, well, North Korea still views it as provocative, but in some ways it is not as directly aimed at them as one would expect. So even though we've got 48 drills, about 20,000 soldiers from the South Korean side, there was some talk ahead of the exercises that there would be a very strong focus on joint deterrence against North Korea's nuclear threat, an actual simulation of a North Korean nuclear attack scenario. But in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the U.S. and then South Korea come out and say, we're not focusing on joint activities related to that. That is not part of the plan. South Korea is still going to have some exercises from its side to deal with potential North Korean nuclear attacks. But for the most part, this is more a general, broad exercise that will also consider North Korea's nuclear use. What form that will take, we don't entirely know. And another change is particularly the U.S. was keen to, or actually South Korea was keen to emphasize that they're not going to have as many exercises, they're not going to hold exercises as close to the North Korean border as they did in the past. Certainly last year we saw a lot of exercises, a lot of photo opportunities actually, in a sense, of exercises being held very close to the inter-Korean border. And I think in some sense, with tensions at the level they are now, perhaps they felt it wasn't conducive, perhaps the US and South Korea together decided this isn't the best approach we can take right now. But at the same time, they want to expand their operations overall, look at different kinds of exercises. So we're seeing amphibious landing drills, we're seeing 5-day air exercises with about 2,000 sorties, and a whole range of exercises that are essentially expanded in a bid to boost joint defense capabilities.
North Korea slammed the UFS drill as a rehearsal for war, saying that, quote unquote, it will constantly maintain the balance of power through great deterrence. Do you expect a military provocation from North Korea in protest?
Well, I think North Korea has already mounted its show of force by showcasing a huge number of rocket launchers that are capable of carrying these tactical ballistic missiles, short-range ballistic missiles, which is essentially a message that North Korea, what kind of nuclear doctrine North Korea has in mind, which is going to be a limited nuclear warfare, and also it's going to showcase other types of weapons. But then overall, I think what they're doing right now is that they're the first phase of their messaging, which is show of force. Oftentimes North Korea, so the case in point is North Korean testing a new rocket engine before actually testing by launching them. So I think they are taking similar steps right now. So show of force followed by an actual provocation. So chances are North Korea might carry out the short-range ballistic missiles at the least, but also there's also possible North Korea could carry out larger caliber missile. And this is always the case in North Korea because North Korea can essentially send very multiple level of messages by carrying out weapon testing. But I think something that is being speculated right now is whether North Korea will carry out much anticipated but often proven, not yet realized, the seventh nuclear test. And then because this is a very important political year for the United States, and then I think there's this concern that North Korea might stage major provocations such as a nuclear test before there's a new administration in Washington. And now clearly there's going to be a new administration because President Biden is not going to run for re-election. So chances that no chance, but it's surely going to be between Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. So I think this incentivizes the North Koreans to start a negotiation with the United States with a clean slate while perfecting their nuclear technology by carrying out the seventh nuclear test. So I think this is the reason why experts are concerned this year, the chance of North Korea carrying out the much delayed the seventh nuclear test is the highest.
And our final question for you, Dr. Go. Kim Jong-un has dedicated 10 days to assisting North Korean people affected by the recent massive floods. Now, Shreyas has also pointed out that North Korea has been too busy focusing on relief aids. What could be his motives, though, behind this rare efforts?
So
and also, while we're on the subject,
Sure.
what do we know about North Korean people's public sentiment toward Kim Jong-un leadership and possibly fourth hereditary succession?
So I think overall the public mood on the Kim Jong-un regime has been souring ever since the pandemic, anti-pandemic measures that were in place for a very long time. Border closure, and there's very strong quarantine measures within the country, which has exacerbated North Korean people suffering, especially in the economic domain. So there's no doubt that people in North Korea are very sour on the regime right now. So what North Korea, the regime has put on the table as in return was strengthening the cult of personality around Kim Jong-un, as well as justifying the North Korea's quest for nuclear development by saying that essentially it's for the future generation of North Korea, and then in the process they used the Kim Ju-ae, the daughter of Kim Jong-un, as a symbol of it. But I think North Korea's this is an unprecedented response by Kim Jong-un by spending 10 days in the zone affected by the flood. It's essentially North Korean regime taking advantage of a crisis as an opportunity. So North Koreans are using this opportunity to essentially strengthen the image of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as a lovely father figure that's trying to help out the public. And in the keyword here for the North Korean regime's propaganda is the idea of a lovely, the leader that loves the people, or Emin. So they're emphasizing this keyword over and over again, but this keyword is not new. Actually, it came out in 2020. So there's a clear continuity in North Korea's propaganda campaign. So you can see, you can consider the North Korea and the Kim Jong-un's continued appearance in the affected zones, affected by the flood, as a part of the North Korea's long-term propaganda campaign. So eventually, I think what North Korea is going to do is to essentially keep the restrictive measures in place. There will be no relaxation of the measures, the law against the South Korean culture, the law against essentially, law against the marketization of the economy and so forth. But in return, North Korea is going to only strengthen the cult of personality. And this is the very example of that right now.
All right, and we'll conclude our discussion there. Thank you, as always, Dr. Go, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Always my pleasure.
And thank you, Shreyas, for your presence with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.